people who often like to have hours-long conversations. How do you manage to talk so long without running out of things to say, and doesn't it make you tired to talk for such a long time? With the right person, when you have a connection, sometimes conversation is practically effortless. There is a natural flow to conversation, especially after you've known the person a while. I am an introvert, so it does usually make me tired to talk for a long time. Yes, but there are a few people who have somehow managed to get into my inner introvert circle, and talking to them doesn't tire me. Oh man, before I moved cities, there was this person I chatted for years online. Well, the week before I moved I had nothing to do, so we talked on the phone. First time, and it was great. Something like 18 hours. I used all the cordless phones in the house, and then dragged the corded phone to my room. Talked about everything, read passages from books we liked, and shared thoughts about everything. It was great. And then I moved to new city, new job, had to make new friends, and we lost touch. She came to visit me once like 10 plus years ago, but I hadn't, so it was a bit awkward. But fun times. Still my record for longest call. This, with certain people, we run out of things to talk about within 15 minutes. With others, we can talk for hours and not get bored. I recently met a girl on Tinder that was from out of town, and we video chatted for literally 7 hours, and it felt like 30 minutes. 2 days later I was picking her up at the airport. I started dating someone nearly 2 months ago, and we recently talked for so long it was past 1 AM by the time we looked at the time. We must have been talking since about 10, we had been Netflixing. Texting with them is also super easy. I don't normally text so much, nor do I do regular greetings or anything like that. But with them it's just so easy. I often say good morning and or good night. They'll share stuff throughout their day, I'll do the same. So like a more private Twitter, it's also been easy to communicate with them about our relationship, expectations and such. Never managed that with anyone else. When the connection is there, things that were so hard to leap over before are barely even a bump. As a fellow introvert, this is so on point. It's weird how some people, you just can't vibe with at all and want the conversation to end ASAP, yet with others, you're so comfortable, someone else needs to get you to shut up. Although TBF, I'm always the person who will, by far, say less in a conversation and will interject or respond when needed. Feel like my in-person circle is pretty much non-existent nowadays though, and not just because of COVID. Yeah, it depends on commonality. Last night was the 4th Yankees game I've gone to this season with one of my fraternity brothers. 3 hours worth of conversation flows effortlessly every time because we both love baseball and have a deep understanding of what's unfolding. I have a social phobia, and I get so much what you mean. For me, it's enough to just find a person I get along with though. However, I have one friend with whom I barely ever hang out alone, but we always talk a shit and when we see each other. A few weeks ago, we met alone on Discord cause I needed his help with something. Next thing I know it's 1 AM. And we've talked for like 4 hours by that point. There are just persons where everything clicks. Well, it depends on the other person. If they give you really short answers and don't engage much, I run out of things to talk about really fast. But if the other person continues the conversation, before we know it, a few hours have passed. It's invigorating, if not dehydrating, to vibe with someone and swap stories and experiences with them for hours on end. Agreed. The two major components are conversational compatibility, and general answer length. If someone just isn't vibing with you, It's hard to feel like the conversation is enjoyable or meaningful, and any dialogue will die pretty quickly. If someone's answers are too short, it's difficult to chain them into any larger ideas. Generally speaking, if someone talks for longer, they will usually say something that you can comment or expand upon. I went on a date with a guy to a cafe for coffee, and we ended up talking for 4 hours straight. I can't even remember what we talked about, but it must have been good to keep going for that length of time. Came here to say this: conversation is a give and take. If you're the one doing all the work, it's not a conversation, it's a soliloquy. Those never last long, unless your name is Hamlet. I'm generally introverted, but if you get me with the right people, I can easily talk for hours. I'll share a story of the best Valentine's Day I ever had. My plans kinda fell through. My roommates, who were and still are together, didn't have anything planned for Valentine's Day. They have their own thing. So we all ended up getting drunk together. Well, my homie started going on about Warhammer 40k, which I had only a vague knowledge of at the time. He proceeded to spend 3 hours explaining various things to me and looking up stuff. I couldn't help but admire his passion, and I got into the lore myself. But we spent the entire night jumping from conversation to conversation about various genres, until we both passed out on the couch. That was some fun times. Same here. I am definitely introverted, so keeping conversations going is kind of hard for me. But with some people it just works. I couldn't say why exactly, but sometimes I just find the right things to say. I used to be so baffled when I was younger how my mom could invite friends over for a day and all they did was talk. But then, I met with a friend for a hike lately and we just talked for hours. We went from German articles are kind of weird and all the fruits are female, except for apple, to knowledge of historical wars and what is happening in Israel right now, to should women be more assertive in job applications, to where the hell are we, and then to studying abroad and plans for internships. And believe it or not, I was able to talk for an entire day, and I could have kept going, and I was even enjoying it. People like that are hard to find in my opinion. I think the people I know that I can do that with, not counting my mom, can be counted on one hand. I have a friend like this too. I absolutely love spending time with him because, like you, I'm naturally introverted and more careful with what I say. But he's so energetic and passionate about so many things that I can listen to him go on and on about the lore of Transformers, which he is apparently very well versed in. Most of the time, our conversations go on for hours and wander through so many different topics that it's impossible to keep track of. Before I got into Final Fantasy, had this same thing happen where dude explained for hours about a storyline. I realized how long the game was and remarked on it, only to find out he only explained the opening act. Honestly, his explanation and passion for the details was so great, it almost made the actual game a little lackluster when I played it myself. My theory is that loquaciousness depends on a person's comfort with intimacy. People who don't worry about sharing intimate details of their life with relative strangers, or who experience very little shame in general, have no problem yapping for hours with anyone. More discriminative people will do the same, but with people they trust more. People highly uncomfortable with intimacy don't talk for long periods of time, because I believe that talking is an intimate activity. You have exposed your thoughts, beliefs, knowledge, or history with another person. Men struggle to be as intimate as women, and thus tend to favor less intimate topics. Had a deep dive into 40k lore the other day. One of the few things I will go on for hours about, but never know where to start. What is the warp? I'm glad you asked. To explain all this we have to go way back to the year 30,000. Well, my homie started going on about Warhammer 40k, which I had only a vague knowledge of at the time. He proceeded to spend 3 hours explaining various things to me and looking up stuff. I knew I'd find that comment. I'm the same. While I'm not super up to date on the fluff, pray for the unfortunate soul that asks me questions about the game world. I like long conversations because there is so much to talk about in this world. Talk about what you like, dislike, what you're for and what you're against, what you find bland, and what you're passionate about. Talk about how something made you feel, versus something that you learned through adversity, or a failure you made that has given you perspective. It's hard to have long conversations with people who give one-word responses. Or when you see the judgment in their eyes. I have a very judgmental mother. It's hard to talk to people without feeling like I'm going to disappoint them or bore them, unless of course I'm talking to a good friend. Asians, because there is so much to talk about in this world. Talk about what you like, dislike, what you're for and what you're against, what you find bland, and what you're passionate about. Talk about how something made you feel, versus something that you learned through adversity, or a failure you made that has given you perspective. It's hard to have long conversations with people who give one-word responses. Yeah? The issue here is that half the time I'm not interested in hearing these things from someone. Sure, I can enjoy those conversations, but they have their time and place. It's not always appropriate to ramble on about all the things you like. It's a little self-involved as you place focus on yourself and your interests and topics you want to discuss with the hopes that the other people will chime in. If a person is providing one-word responses, then they are giving you social cues that they are either uninterested in what you are saying, don't want to talk with you, they have something on their mind, or they are being pushed into a situation that causes them anxiety. I think your partner makes all the difference when it comes to this. I've had a few rare times where I couldn't get enough of someone, in which case, it almost doesn't matter what they say, I'm happy. That's when it's a pleasure, not a chore. Otherwise I just won't do it either. I think this comment hints at something. The ops post didn't indicate that they were necessarily interested in having long conversations themselves, just interested in understanding how people do it. The last long conversation that I had started out as passion and ended up as chore. It did, however, lead to some clarity. I realized that I was no longer interested in having a friendship with that person, which is what I later explained to them when they tried to initiate another long conversation. We haven't spoken since, and I'm okay with that. My mother and grandmother are terrible at this. Most of the time they just want to get things off their chest. Really? So they talk and talk. Whenever anyone else says something they just go MH, MH, MH. You can so hear so well they're not actually listening, and you can hear the impatience in their voice. They're just waiting until they can blurt out their saved up things to say. I myself don't talk much anyway, but this doesn't make our conversations any longer. So I talk at most 15 minutes a week to my mother, whereas my wife can talk for hours with her parents and she calls them every day. Don't save up things to say and say them when the other person is done talking. Listen to listen, not to wait for your turn to speak. Once you forfeit the urge to say something, you begin to truly understand the other person. Soon enough, when it is your turn to speak, you will have caught on to many more details that you would have if you just focus on saying your one thing. If the other person is the same, the conversation isn't only natural and pleasant, it can go on for hours. A lot of people wait to talk when they are listening. They don't listen for content, they listen for their time to speak. That is why so many relationships fall apart when it gets to the emotionally intimate part, because so many times people will just ignore 80% of the conversation so that they can say their thing. I will derail my entire line of thought to ask someone, does that happen a lot, or does it affect you this strongly whenever it does happen? Or something along those lines, and the conversation will get so much more personal and emotionally, intellectually intimate. That's the key between genuinely listening to and just hearing what someone is saying. Don't save up things to say and say them when the other person is done talking. This is key. This is literally the only way I have anything to say. It takes me so long to think of anything to say, and the gaps in conversations are always way too short to fit in time for thought plus speech. The only way to actually get a word in is if you think of something to say and wait for the chance to say it. I really don't understand how people can just sit down and have a conversation without stressing about it, or without even having to think. Depends on the person. My bestie, who I sadly don't see too often anymore, thanks pandemic, we'd literally lay on the couch and living room floor for hours, just chatting. We'd normally start by catching up on life things, and then we'd discuss whatever's on our minds that might be controversial to others. She's one of maybe 3 people I can literally say anything and get no judgment. Sometimes, random thoughts that pop into my head, that may not be appropriate in other settings, I'll blurt it out and she'd just go with the flow. Our chats normally go for hours. Long conversations don't work like small talk, where you pick a sort of general, safe topic, and both people take short turns swapping personal information and generalities. Long conversations work more like a discussion-based college class. You spend less time talking about yourself and more time talking about, like, how one cartoonist compares to a different cartoonist, or how different fiber arts work, or social norms in Renaissance Venice. Basically, it's more analytical and you're usually learning something. Also, don't just sit still. Go for a walk with the person. Or if you're talking on the phone, do chores while you talk. It helps keep you engaged and alert. I cannot keep my hands still when I talk to someone for a longer time. If I have a tissue close, that thing is ripped to shreds by the end of the conversation. Or you could sit a pot of peas and pebbles in front of me, I would 100% start sorting them. When I'm motorically busy, I can concentrate way better on what I hear and think. I'll get a fidget toy soon. I think that's better than killing all the tissues in my home. Oh, and scribbling is nice too. For me, it helps remembering what I heard and said during that time, and basically holding a thought. I've heard 2-hour-long phone calls from my GF to her mother. I can only hear my GF side, but literally nothing of substance is said. The reason for calling could have been a text, or 5-minute call tops. After that, it's about 2 hours or so of repeating things they talked about last week. So while I agreed with you, I've seen times when none of that is true. I'm a chatterbox, and I know a little bit about a lot of things, so I can always carry a conversation in some topic. It's also a form of socialization. I grew up in a society where talking was the heart of the evening. You don't go to dinner with your friends to have dinner. You go to talk, and the food is there to give you something to do while you converse. It's also quite stimulating and invigorating when you run into someone else who shares similar interests. One of my best friends would spend literally hours, I'm talking 3+, with me, just talking about different movies, scenes we enjoyed, shows, stories, etc. For the record, 80% of the time we're literally talking about things we've both seen, read, yet we can still kill that many hours together talking about them. It reinforces and forges bonds between people. Edit, thank you kind internet stranger. The most valuable piece of advice I ever received from anyone came from my editor at a daily newspaper. He told me that you can be a good journalist by knowing a little about a lot or a lot about a little, but the only way to be great is to know a lot about a lot. Not only did heeding that advice make me a better journalist, but it also made me far better at Jeopardy, and a better conversationalist, too.